Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell. Miranda thought she had been unlucky all her life. It was either karma or an ancestral curse that haunted her. The girl didn't know exactly, but she knew that for every one of her good fortunes, there were 7 failures. It had been that way since she was a child, and probably it will continue to be so. Doon thought to herself, the owner of such a rare nowadays name. Usually, all the worst in her line of faith fell on the late fall around the end of October, early November. That was why Miranda quietly hated it. That cold and such a dreary time of year. It was hard for her to love time after time the repetitive moments of nature in which a monstrous and totally unfair tragedy had befallen her family many years ago. In the girl's opinion, Miranda was 5 when her parents' car overturned on an ice-slick road just at the end of November. At night there were hard frosts, and in the morning on the highway the nodding already had time to solidify the ice crust. The girl was at home at that moment. Together with Lisa's grandmother, the parents had gone to a relative's house for a birthday party. The couple knew that the holiday is likely to last until late at night, and therefore decided not to torture the child and did not take Miranda with them. The girl remembered how in the middle of the night, the home phone suddenly began to ring painfully loud. The grandmother went to the receiver. Miranda heard the lever click. "We pick up the phone," and then sleepily, "Hello, Lisa." After a few seconds, there was complete silence in the hallway, and then there was a rumble. Miranda immediately jumped out of bed, and when she ran out into the hallway, she was horrified to see the unconscious grandmother collapsed on the floor. Doctors at the regional hospital later said that the girl's father and mother actually miraculously survived in a car accident of this type. However, both parents suffered very serious injuries and were hospitalized for a long time before they were able to return home again. Mom Miranda Kelly received a severe concussion and since then had serious memory problems, which only worsened with age. Stephen's father, on the other hand, was even less fortunate. The man was permanently disabled, having received an extremely severe fracture of the spine. From now on, the man could move exclusively in a wheelchair. In addition, he was constantly tormented by headaches, from which almost no painkillers did not help. Of course, the doctors suggested that Miranda's parents could still be brought back to a more or less active social life if he and his grandmother managed to get certain imported medicines. However, such money, how much these drugs cost in the family twigs them from time immemorial did not see. Therefore, all care for Stephen and Kelly's condition fell on the shoulders of the grandmother and her granddaughter. For the next 10 years, all the way through high school, Miranda helped Lisa keep her own parents afloat. Of course, there was no question of them going back to their day jobs. Miranda's mother used to work as a saleswoman almost without a day off, and in her only free evening, she hurried to the nearest car service center, where she worked part-time as a cleaner. As for her father, his place as a driver, combined harvester and other large industrial machinery on the farm was quickly taken by a young healthy guy, one of the protégés of the owner of the agro complex itself. Both parents got disability pensions. Grandma got her own. That was all the income they had. From the moment their ill-fated Jiguli crashed, Miranda's childhood ended abruptly and a harsh adult life began, in which the main task of a small, unfortunate family was to survive in the difficult conditions of village life. Grandmother and granddaughter denied themselves almost everything to spend the money received from the state for medicines for sick household members. Mother and father were terribly worried that the grief that fell on them so strongly affects the future of their beloved daughter. "Oh, Miranda, you shouldn't be messing around with us," Stephen often complained. He was still more or less mobile, and his hands were still more or less mobile. "Put us in a nursing home and be done with it. You don't need to go for a walk." not with helpless coworkers. But how many times have I told you not to refer to yourself and your mom as coworkers? Yes, it's a tragedy. Yes, it's very hard on all of us. But that doesn't change the fact that we're a family. And as we take care of each other, we will continue to do so. How much more can I do? That's my dad waving his screwdriver around. You got that right. How much? Strength is enough. You ruin your young years. You'll blame us for everything. You only think you can do it alone. But life is a long thing. You'll never know how tomorrow will turn out. Before you know it, you'll be an old maid in a ruined house with no one to nail down a nail. However, Miranda was not used to giving up. The girl did everything to earn an extra penny for her family while studying in middle school. She herself went to local houses and offered her services in tutoring first graders in Russian and literature. As she got a little older, Miranda took her mother's place at a recycling center in an auto repair shop. The money from cleaning helped the family to make ends meet. And then there was the farm and the vegetable garden. The girl was spinning like a squirrel in a wheel, trying to combine housework, studies, and evening earnings in one day. When Miranda was in the 10th grade, Lisa's grandmother began to feel ill. At the appointment at the polyclinic, it turned out that the woman had a disappointing diagnosis, a brain disease that could not be treated with medication. Only surgery could help, but it cost a lot of money. And the waiting list at the state hospital threatened to drag on for years. So, martyr, what must be, must be. Sadly, Lisa sighed. I guess it's not my destiny to be at your wedding. What are you talking about? Grandma, what wedding? Miranda was indignant. We need to get you on your feet first, and then everything else. And who needs such a penniless girl? Good face. The girl lit up with a sad smile. Oh, Lisa, I didn't think I'd have to leave this world so soon. I thought I'd live to help you and your mother and father. I can't imagine. How will you be here without me? Don't be silly. Her granddaughter scolded her. We should try to get in line for surgery, and then I'll go. I'm going to the Capitol. I'll try to get an appointment with the chief surgeon. Maybe we can speed things up. I'll tell him about our situation. Maybe it'll work out. It's all right. Lisa just stroked Miranda's head affectionately. My God, you look just like your mother, don't you? Tears glistened in the old woman's eyes. She was just as stubborn as my mother. Now she can't even remember her own name sometimes. Lisa, you're a good woman. I'll pray to God for one thing, how to get away. I'll start that everything in your life will turn out differently, a happy one. The girl lost her tears, the old woman, and answered, trying to reduce everything to a joke. Come on, Baba, as if you don't know that I am unlucky in your life. My heart. She's like a stone shell at this point, a narcissist. It's suddenly very heavy and very, very unsettling. The senior's intuition was correct. The trip to the city ended with nothing for her. Miranda managed to get through to the head doctor. But that was the end of it. Having thoroughly studied Lisa's medical history and the pictures presented to Miranda, he dispelled the girl's last illusions, saying that the waiting list for this kind of surgery is written out for months, if not years in advance. And even very wealthy people sometimes have to wait for a very long time. What can we say about ordinary citizens? I'm sorry, said the doctor, spreading his hands. All I can do for you in this difficult situation is only sincerely sympathize. Try to spend more time with your grandmother. This may be her last year. It was October. Miranda realized that another dark hour in her life was coming very soon. And so it was at the very beginning of December, when the first uncertain layer of pure snow covered the ground. Grandma was gone. Lisa was buried by the whole village. She had given the best years of her life to the only local school, teaching chemistry and biology. From under her wing came out almost all the adults who remained to live in the village. Therefore, having learned about what happened, they immediately discounted who could and helped the young girl worthily to spend their favorite teacher on the way. The family rags remained three: the mother and father, Miranda herself. Since with the death of the grandmother disappeared and part of the money of Lisa's pension, Stephen felt by then great strength in his hands. He decided on his part to help torn between his daughter's studies and work, and began to master small souvenirs made of wood, which he later took by himself to a small village market or sold at the station passing travelers from intercity trains received for such modest work money. Father tried to give every penny to Miranda. "Here, daughter, at least buy yourself a new dress for the prom. It would be a shame if my daughter wore rags, an old sweater, and a skirt to the party, wouldn't it?" Miranda's father persuaded Miranda. "Don't, Dad. Put that money in the piggy bank. We will find a more useful use for them," answered the daughter. "And then I won't go to the graduation. What will I do there? I'll get my diplomas and go home." "Mariana, why are you like this?" With deep sadness in her voice, Kelly entered the conversation. "It's such a day, only once in a lifetime happens." Poor woman felt terribly guilty in front of her daughter. Because of her illness, she could not find even the simplest part-time work. Her memory could fail her at the worst possible moment. And then, Kelly couldn't remember even the most basic things. For example, how to hold a pen or how to open a door. Miranda only dismissed all this, saying that it was not such a great day to spend such a huge amount of money for the sake of it at once, and the graduation was required to give several 1,000 at once, not counting the dress and shoes. Despite all the difficulties, the girl managed to finish school with a silver medal. After graduation, Miranda planned to immediately start looking for a job, as she had no energy for further study and money to pay for her studies. In a decent university, she could not manage to save up for the whole time. Realizing that she was more needed here, the girl tried to do everything possible to provide her family with a minimum income. However, finding a stable job in the village was not so easy. In most cases, people with technical knowledge or skills of professional farming were needed here. Rags Kinnack from the livestock was only poultry. Chicken and geese were the maximum of those animal husbandry knowledge which could boast Miranda. On the other hand, the girl would very much like to go to work as a teacher of Russian and literature. But, unfortunately, this position required a higher, or at least specialized, secondary education, which, of course, she did not have. Fortunately, at that time, one of the elderly teachers, who knew Lisa well, was preparing to become a grandmother for the third time. Her daughter, who worked in the village library, was again preparing to go on a long maternity leave, so she offered the vacated position to a recent graduate. Needless to say, Miranda accepted without hesitation. The new place of work quickly drew the girl in. It was quiet, and she didn't have to do many chores, the most difficult of which were watering the flowers and wet cleaning the tiny reading room. Miranda was savvy and lazy, so she was easily able to learn the basics of librarianship. Nothing more was required of her. It was in the library that she first saw Christopher. Not too tall, but possessed a good build and thick frame hair, dark Russian in color. The guy had quickly won her over. The heart of the young librarian. Christopher wandered confusedly between the shelves, obviously not knowing which book to choose. Miranda just happened to come to his rescue. Looking for something specific, she asked the author politely, a particular genre. The boy poured himself thickly with paint, not knowing how best to answer. Finally, he hesitantly said, "You know, yes, I actually do not choose for myself. My aunt broke her leg. She is now lying in our regional hospital, so I asked her to bring her something to read, preferably a love novel. And I'm not very good at love stories, you know." Miranda smiled a little slyly, involuntarily shook her lush belly of wheat hair. Then I suggest, you take Jackie Collins. Your aunt will love the classics, she said, pulling the book off the shelf. Christopher thanked Miranda, and that's how they met. Then he often visited the girl at work on the pretext of choosing books for his mother and godmother. Both by then knew that they had mutual feelings, but continued to act as if there was nothing between them but a purely professional relationship. Readers and librarians. Another month later, Christopher dared to invite Miranda on their first date, after which they officially became a couple. However, the young people did not manage to spend as much time together as they had hoped. Christopher was unexpectedly drafted into the army and had to leave for 2 years. Miranda promised to wait for him and honestly kept her word to the guy. Time flew by unnoticed. But when Christopher returned from the army, Miranda was in for a very unpleasant surprise. The guy suddenly stopped contacting and picking up the phone when the girl tried to call him. Miranda did not understand what was the matter. After all, while her lover was in the service, she tried to keep in touch with him in every possible way, sent him touching letters, her photos, and gave him all sorts of goodies that she could buy on her modest salary as a librarian. In one of the last letters, shortly before the demobilization of young people agreed to get married as soon as Christopher returned home, the girl began to worry whether something bad had happened to her fiancé. Trying to find out the truth, Miranda came home to Christopher's Aunt Kathy and firmly demanded that she finally tell her what had happened to her lover. Kathy, being a mature woman, understood perfectly well what had happened. However, to say it, girls are not spoiled by hard fate. Still, she was a little afraid. She more than once came a couple at home, as she brought up Christopher alone and Miranda purely humanly she liked very much. However, the heart of the young groom could not be ordered. Today he loves one thing, and tomorrow he is already dying. He can't live without the other. That's what Miranda neatly started on you. I know the girl is reasonable, and therefore you will understand everything. And I'm sure you can forgive Christopher. Maybe not right away in time, but I think you can. Miranda was immediately alerted by a bad feeling, a prickling in her chest, like a small, sharp needle, and her mouth went dry. Kathy, what's wrong? Where's Christopher? She asked the woman point blank. The woman intelligently adjusted her miniature gold-rimmed glasses. You see, Miranda, life happens like that. Anyway, Christopher has chosen another bride for himself. The girl, hearing the news, barely managed to grab the back of the chair in the small kitchen. Everything inside of her had definitely collapsed. That is how the other, Miranda said with difficulty choosing the words. How long ago? It's been 3 months, hasn't it? To be honest, I wasn't very happy that Christopher didn't write to you himself. You could have warned him. You wouldn't have waited for him. And then you would have looked at the other guys, looked around. What about it? Christopher and I wanted to be together till we were old. We were planning a vacation when we went to the city. Miranda must have fallen into unconsciousness. He kept repeating the same phrases. Kathy was afraid of whether the girl is not already crazy and hurried to pour her a glass of cold water. You're not yourself, girl. He didn't do it out of spite. When he saw Christina at our club last spring, he must have taken an interest in her. Christina only managed to interrogate Mariana, taking a few sips from the proposed glass. Is it the one who is the chairman's daughter? Yes, the woman replied calmly. He told me all the time that he couldn't decide between you, saying he loved both of you. Miranda couldn't believe it. Her fiancé was dating 2 girls at the same time. Christina was the recognized beauty of the village and the daughter of the chairman. Clearly, the desire to get a rich bride instead of a homeless girl conquered Christopher's feelings for her. Kathy, where is Christopher now? Not in his own voice, Miranda asked. A slight shadow passed over the face of the woman standing next to her. You don't need to know this, Miranda, but I'm sick of the girl. His wedding with Christina is today. Miranda didn't remember exactly how she had gotten home. Yeah, it didn't matter now. Her most precious possession had been taken from her. What else could a girl stand against this harsh outside world? Her own heart. After what had happened, Miranda became particularly indifferent to everything, as if she had lost that most important part of herself, which was responsible for the desire to live and look optimistically into the future. She saw Christopher and Karina several more times before they finally moved to another city. Christopher preferred not to look his ex-girlfriend in the eye. He was still blushing adorably red with embarrassment as he had on the first day they met, but now it no longer caused in Miranda former attacks of tenderness. The young librarian's heart seemed to be completely empty. There was nothing left in it but the care of her parents and the daily duty of going to work. However, even work was now causing Miranda more and more negative feelings. Almost everything here reminded her of the happy days spent with Christopher. Happy days of falseness, when after meeting her he had run to his second passee, much richer and much more beautiful. The result of mental torment was Miranda's decision to leave her native and at the same time suddenly became so hateful village. In fact, it was Miranda's best friends who took the initiative. Clara and Cindy. The girls have long been planning to move to the metropolis, but just now they were able to collect enough money for the intended purpose. Seeing how tormented their best friend classmates offered her to go with them. "Come on," Cindy urged the girl. "But what's keeping you here except your parents? And there everything is new, and you'll meet your happiness." And she met her happiness in a more rational way. "Clara, I'd have to find a job first, and a place to rent, preferably not in the suburbs. But in general, Cindy is right. You'll go away. You'll have some fun. Try to make a fresh start. It's corny, but it is, isn't it?" Miranda shook her head uncertainly. All three of them were sitting by the light in the kitchen, drinking instant coffee from large ceramic mugs. "Oh, girls, this is what scares me. Who's gonna watch Mom and Dad? I mean, they'd be lost without me. How are your neighbors?" "On what?" nonchalantly asked Clara. "Talk to your neighbors. Explain the situation. At home, they'll understand and help in any way they can. They're strangers. They're just like Clara," Miranda said worriedly. "If something happens, they won't even know what to do right away, will they? And you write them instructions on a piece of paper. I've seen that in movies." Cindy, always a little infantile, easily came up with a solution. "The thought of porno," said Clara and laughed. Her ringing laughter infected everyone, including Miranda. For a moment, the girl thought that this was it. Any problems can be solved, if only you apply a bit of logic and are not afraid to ask someone you know for help, at least the most basic one. However, the light mood did not last long. Coming home, the girl felt the weight of everyday domestic problems pile on her again. The father, seeing the gloomy mood, his daughter dared to ask what was the reason. He knew that Miranda was still suffering from the betrayal of her fiancé, and therefore he wanted to ease her mental anguish a little. The girl at first did not want to talk about her desire to leave, but then she gave in. Stephen listened to her and, to his daughter's surprise, was overjoyed. It turned out that he had wanted Miranda to start living her own life away from home for a long time. "Go, of course, daughter. But what is there to think about?" the father said cheerfully and took the girl's hands in his. "My mother and I will be happy. Don't worry about us. There is a friend who lives nearby and always brings wood for the fire. I'm Adriana from the third house, but I'm a former nurse who will fly for my mother. We don't live alone in the field. Good people will help in any way they can." Tears of gratitude glistened in my daughter's eyes. "Thank you, Daddy," she whispered tenderly, kissing her father on the cheek stiff from the old stubble. I promise I'll be sure to move you in as soon as I can. But don't worry." He patted his daughter on the back. "Stop crying, or look what a flood you've made." Stephen smiled sincerely, and Miranda felt how the ice crust on her soul cracked a little, and to her heart at once a little warm protest, a gentle wave of hope. A few days later, having gathered her own remaining savings and reluctantly taking some of the money that her father had secretly put aside, Miranda and her friends set off to find their place in the capital. The huge, noisy metropolis really stunned the girl. Unlike her humble, sleepy village, there was a bustling life on every corner. Storefronts burned with inviting lights, awakens in Miranda a vague desire for youth, which she had long ago forbidden herself. The models' beautiful clothes drew the eye, promising a sweet, unblemished life. Of course, Miranda realized it was all just an illusion. Beautiful bait for provincial moths who had not yet had time to fly with all the charms of metropolitan life. However, the girl had to admit that after the rural wilderness, in which the scenery was only a river and the local house of culture, the glamour of a huge city was perceived. Incredibly acute. The girls managed to rent one room for 3 people not far from the subway, after which they actively began to look for work. Here, the first unpleasant surprise awaited them. Almost all less decent places asked for detailed resumes with work experience, as well as a positive recommendation from a previous employer. Of course, none of them could boast of such things. Cindy worked for a few months as a milkmaid on a farm. Clara tried to learn the craft of an accountant in the same car service, where Miranda used to work part-time. In general, the girls didn't get much work experience. All the time, Miranda was offered only 2 options of vacancies: or to work, as it was in the village, as a cleaner in stores and shopping centers, or to go behind the counter as a salesman. The girl knew from her mother's experience that both of these professions would bring her nothing good. In both cases, she would only get health problems and finally lose the chance to find her own way in this life. The girl tried to get a job in the city's large libraries, of which there were many. But alas, unlike the village ones, here you needed a special education and impeccable appearance. Then Miranda, who came to the capital in an old sweater and pants, survived for the 3rd time, definitely couldn't boast. Everywhere she was pointed at the door, some politely and some not so politely, desperate to find a normal job. Friends discounted from the general money and paid a specialist from the recruitment agency to find them something with a salary, with a level close to the realities of metropolitan life. Fortunately, here the result did not take long to wait. In a couple of days, the friends were invited to a closed interview, where each of them was offered a suitable place. Lissa did not get an open vacancy as a maid in an elite country mansion, including accommodation and meals. The girl was warned that candidates for this position are evaluated very strictly. If she failed to pass the probationary period, she would hardly be able to count on any job in the metropolis at all. Miranda believed in her own strength and decided that if she could combine the duties of a cleaner and a gardener to look after the library plants, she could also cope with the duties of a maid. After agreeing, the girl received all the necessary coordinates of the employer. Then she waited for a call back. The agency assured her that she would be contacted within a few days at most. And if they do not call, she shared her doubts with her friends. "I can't even imagine how I'll get back to our village. My father is probably already introducing me to some successful business lady. They'll call. You'll see," Clara assured her, adjusting her own uniform. The girl had already been contacted, and now she was on her first day as administrator of a beauty salon. The firm was small, but the pay promised to be good. Cindy was also lucky enough to get an administrative position at a fitness club only. Finally, Lisa was not called, and after clarifying a number of business issues, was told to pack her things and wait for the company car that would pick her up the next morning. To be taken to Miranda's mansion, it was very exciting to be traveling out of town and even with the opportunity to live in a luxurious house, it simultaneously delighted and scared the girl a little. What would happen if she didn't make it through the probationary period? Suddenly, she will not be able to properly make the bed or bring the owner's breakfast. These were all questions that plagued Miranda, so she didn't get much sleep the night before the trip. The girl felt in her gut that soon she was going to live an extraordinary new life. Only what kind? On this question, the inner voice of the former librarian did not give an answer. In the early morning, a large black business car with tinted windows pulled up to the entrance of the house where the three friends lived. Miranda was already waiting downstairs, having gathered her modest belongings. Hugging Cindy goodbye, the girl got into the car. The salon struck her with its cleanliness, the softness of the leather on the upholstery of the seats, and the pleasant aroma in those rare cabs that ran sometimes from the station to their village always smelled of fish, tobacco, and the seats were often covered with lime oil and traces of strong alcohol. Outside the window, the scenery was incredibly beautiful. The road, which gradually went out of the city, was replaced first by neatly pronounced ornamental trees, and then by compact cottages and settlements. The small houses were accurately drawn from postcards about carefree pastorals, the new life that Miranda had only read about in books, and even then mostly by foreign authors. After passing the checkpoint with a striped barrier, the car entered a closed suburban complex where it was absolutely impossible for a person from the street to get in. Miranda felt like she was in some other world. There were high stone fences made of red bricks everywhere, behind which one could see the outlines of huge houses, more like real castles. The girl did not yet know that she would soon have to work in one of them. Finally, the car stopped in front of the gates of such a mansion. When Miranda got out, she immediately felt the unpleasant gaze of 2 or 3 cameras, closely following the movements of the girl and the driver. "Well, here we are," the one reported contentedly. "Wait here a little bit. I'll report you to the owners." The man called the video intercom installed in a special niche next to the gate and in a few seconds disappeared in the slowly evolving steel doors. The luxurious house with a swimming pool, a golf green, and a stunning rose garden, laid out in the shape of a labyrinth, belonged to the Hoards family of the head of the family. William was a very influential businessman who in all trips and business meetings was accompanied by his own wife Emma, who held the post of chief financial officer of the company, specialized in international shipping, millet, and other grains, for which they were popularly nicknamed the Bread Kings. The couple's network also owned several dozen bakers scattered not only in the capital, but throughout the country. In each region had 1 or 2 branches of the company. Therefore, the business of the couple worked with the precision of a Swiss watch. Together with his parents in a luxurious mansion lived their adult son Lamb. The guy outwardly was very good-looking, but the character had just disgusting. Spoiled, subject to frequent attacks of hysteria. The 25-year-old led a life full of forbidden pleasures. His parents' money spoiled him from childhood, making him an egomaniac, which is why any man on Liam's radar, the rich major perceived as a thing with the only difference that for a man such things as he himself liked to put it, had to pay several times more. Expensive alcohol, wild parties by the pool, and dabbling with illegal substances in the company of beautiful girls of easy behavior. Such was the young mustachioed man's circle of interests. Spouses, businessmen of course, did not encourage such a pastime of their son, but for the most part looked at everything that happened through their fingers. Parents believed that all sons of wealthy people should pass this vicious circle at a young age to finally solve it with all the opportunities available to them. After that, their children would usually settle down and smoothly transition into real study and serious management of family affairs. Fortunately, in the early days of Miranda, the boyfriend was hardly ever seen. He either slept all through the night after raucous parties or hung out all day, visiting his friends of the same rich son. It wasn't until a couple weeks later that Junior noticed. The new maid at the warehouse house. I hope you've been briefed on the probationary period. The formidable housekeeper and part-time ruler of the house. Homesteaders, Betty of Rowan. Eyes fixed on the young girl. Tall, the thin woman was not accustomed to seeing pretty adventurers seeking, under the guise of maids, to sneak into the bedroom of the Russian son, or, worse, into the master himself. Over the years of managing the affairs of the estate, Betty had learned to spot them from a mile away and get rid of them in time. The last attempt was successful again. A young provincial and still recently swept the cattle yard in his village decided that she could get a whole household son and even, oh horror, marry him to herself. However, the lady ruler in time wrested the wrong and threw out the scoundrel at the same time, handing a wolf ticket. Now this girl will not take a job in any decent establishment, thus leaving the choice to roll back home or stay in the city, but to go to work in a brothel. From Miranda. There was no new intern and no maid Betty. All they needed was for her to perform her duties with due diligence and attention. They really needed a good, hard-working girl who could be relied on in any circumstance, whether it was a gala reception at William's house or a traditional family dinner in a small circle of friends and close relatives. Maids, in their home, one had to be a shadow, yet fulfill many different functions. The slightest deviation from the course set for the ladies by the ruler could cost both the girl and the ruler herself dearly. Remember, Miranda, it is up to you and your behavior. Here it depends on whether you can work off the contract entrusted to you and leave this house for a new life with a glowing recommendation and career prospects. Or Betty looked sternly at the girl again. Or will you never be able to get a job anywhere in this particular city ever again? That much is clear to you. Looking down at the floor, Miranda replied, quietly, I came here to fulfill my contract, and I don't want any trouble. I just want to work here. The lady manager only smiled crookedly in response. That's a good answer. Well done. Let's see what you can do. I guess everyone knows how to flatter. For the next week, Miranda learned how to make beds properly, to carry 2 trays of food and drink in one hand at a time, to clean the rooms of the mansion in order. And most importantly, she was learning to be inconspicuous. Rising for the servants in the house by the storerooms began at 5 o'clock sharp. That was an hour later than Miranda was used to getting up at home to feed and let the birds out to graze. Then followed a small meeting where all the workers of the house had to be present. At this meeting, everyone was given their individual work plan for the day. The employees then had exactly 15 minutes for breakfast before their workday began. None of these men or women, and there were a total of 10 people working in the house, including the girl herself. There was no thought of trying to slack off or directly shirking their duties, and in fact, it is unlikely that they would have succeeded. After all, the mansion was literally on the sword with video cameras both external and hidden. Therefore, it was simply impossible to evade here. Very soon, Miranda proved to everyone in the house that she was hired for a reason. The girl worked neatly and diligently. She was the last to leave the evening meeting, where Betty discussed the results of each employee's work for the previous day. The manager was pleased with the modesty and really quality work of the new maid. In her memory, Miranda was one of the few girls born and raised in the provinces who had come to the big city and to this particular house to work, not to seek easy profits by scheming with the bosses. Betty never praised the staff, believing that praise only discouraged them and made them lazy. However, in this case, the woman was so pleasantly surprised by Miranda's behavior that she could not hold back the dry but benevolent admonition. Will you be able to accomplish much in this life? Miranda, believe me, a woman who has seen a great deal in her years of work and life. In this house, you are a rare exception to a sad rule. "Thank you," looking down at the floor, the girl replied. "I am honored to hear you say that." "Really?" Miranda, what to hide, was a little afraid of the stern, thin woman who served as the manager of the place. She had been instructed beforehand how to behave with Nancy so as not to get into trouble. Of course, the girl was extremely surprised to hear such a flattering review of her work. However, the new maid still did not leave the feeling that it was all part of one big test, and she should always be on guard, not giving in to the manifestation of her own emotions. The first time this happened was a month after Miranda had taken up residence in the Annuals' home as a maid. It was then that she first experienced that slippery and sticky look on her face, which made her want to immediately go for a shower. Once, coming out of her room, late at night waking up from another hangover, Slavu Sweet accidentally bumped into their new maid in the hallway. The rich man immediately noted to himself that the girl was quite attractive even by the standards of the local servants. The guy especially liked Miranda's natural golden belly and hair. The girl was noticeably different from that set of solid blondes and rough brunettes of Bambino, which the young major was used to seeing around him. Determined to find out immediately what the odds were, Liam deftly caught the maid heading for the pantry and, taking the vacuum cleaner from her hands, began an unexpected acquaintance with the following phrase, "Wow, and he did not tell me, Daddy, that we hired such a charming nymph." Miranda felt only a strong odor of overdrive from the bread hair. At that moment, "Good evening. My name is Miranda. I am your new maid," answered the girl as she was taught by the manager. "I was hired a month ago. We've met before. It's just that you weren't paying attention." Lupu, tired of his younger self, a deep wrinkle erupted. He was clearly trying to remember the girl, but he was failing miserably. "That's great," Miranda thought to herself with relief. "If he doesn't remember me, then I'm doing my job, right? It doesn't matter," the guy mumbled in the end. That's what Miranda. And why does this girl with such a pretty name have to sneak out late at night instead of going to her place to rest long ago? Liam looked at the maid with surprisingly beautiful, but also surprisingly empty gray eyes. It seemed that all his soul had long ago gone out of them, leaving behind only ashes. For a second, Miranda reminded me of the famous Dorian Gray, or rather, how this literary character could look like in real life, who had transferred all his black vices onto the canvas from his own portrait. "I'm here because cleaning is my job," the girl replied politely, but a little aloofly. "If you'll allow me, I'll take the vacuum cleaner back room. There's an evening meeting in the servants' kitchen soon." The younger one slowly ran his tongue over his lips while looking down at the girl. "But run, or the old crow will reveal that her helpers are being kidnapped again. But I'll see you again. Don't doubt it, Miranda." The poor maid felt her throat, her bile rumbling up her throat. Not only does this major allow himself to say such rude words to Betty, but he also said her name. So all in all, the girl wanted to wash her hands immediately. Unfortunately, this meeting with the rich heir was not the last one for Miranda. Ever since the Bread Prince saw Miranda and talked to her, his thoughts have constantly revolved around the pretty and so innocent-looking maid. Would it really taste as fresh as it looks? The boy dreamed sorrowfully, lying in front of the huge TV in his room. The wide multicolored screen was broadcasting a cable channel of explicit content. Liam slowly drove his index finger across his knee, imagining his new maid doing it. After this incident, the major began to run into Miranda all the time. Hints then, and pants could get a lot more money if she satisfied his special whim. However, the girl was disgusted. Even the thought that this man would dare to touch her, let alone enter into a relationship with him. Of course, Miranda realized that what he needed from her was far from love and sincere feelings, but something much more trivial and at the same time scary. but something you break and calm down. Once again, jam the girl under the stairs, whispered passionately in her ear Major, as if you had no one before me. I didn't. By Miranda's public face, the scoundrel realized he had hit exactly the target. The weak Junior's face stretched into a lewd smile. He once again seduced the maid with his close as a spider's web gaze. Don't be afraid, I will be gentle, very gentle with you. Attempted to stroke her victory Liam. Miranda tried to scream, but the boy only squeezed her thin hand to the point of pain. Don't even try to yell at me. I get it, or you're out of this house. Like a champagne cork. Suddenly, the light in the doorway was blocked by a tall, gaunt figure. It was Betty. Liam, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there someone on the phone for you? They say it's urgent about cyber betting, the manager announced in an icy tone. The Major reluctantly tore himself away from Miranda's unhappy girl still and unwilling dead. Throwing a warning glance at her, the guy quietly slipped past Betty. Definitely was a huge living snake. The manageress looked at Miranda carefully. She could see that this time it wasn't the maid herself who had taken the initiative and wanted to sincerely sympathize with the girl, especially since there were already legends about the love affairs of the son of Odessa in this city. But with all her sympathy for Miranda, she could not allow the house to once again spread unseemly rumors about the relationship between the youngest and the next maid. As much as she felt sorry for her best employee, she had to solve the problem created by the Major's fault. Sort out your personal affairs with Liam as soon as possible, the manager advised in an indifferent voice. The house must not know what is going on, even if there is anything to it. I am quite sure it is not your fault. The girl only nodded in reply. She was shivering like an aspen leaf in an autumn wind. All right, Betty, I'll try to straighten things out as soon as possible. The maid herself was thinking at that moment that she had forgotten to mark her happiest time of the year on the calendar. Outside the window, it was just about the end of November. For a few days after that, the master's son left the girl alone. Miranda began to harbor a faint hope that Liam might be interested in someone else by now, but it was all in vain. The Major was only thinking of getting what he wanted as soon as possible, and he had no intention of surrendering. He only wanted to put the maid's vigilance to sleep in order to cunningly carry out his cunning plan. The right case itself came a few days later, when his parents again flew to conclude a favorable deal with foreign investors. Late at night, the guy burst into the girl's bedroom and began actively breaking her twigs on her twigs. Wake up, who am I talking to? You're the one who forgot to turn off the faucet in the back when you were getting water. Did you even see what you did in there? It's a real flood. After a dream, the girl didn't realize what was going on. She did clean the kitchen tonight after all the workers had left, but she couldn't remember whether she closed the faucet or not. So she jumped off the bed in her nightgown. Miranda ran after Liam down the road, thinking about where to get dry rags. And if the ones in the back room were already wet, they'd probably be soaking wet. That was the bastard's calculation. When the girl entered the back room with a quick step, she did not immediately realize what was happening. It was dry all around, only faintly, and the only light bulb on, creating a light, glowing hole everywhere. Behind herself, she suddenly heard the sharp click and turn of a key in the keyhole. It was Liam who had locked the door, the back room, and was now looking at her with eyes full of wild desire. At the slides, the younger man began to move slowly toward the girl. Liam, what are you doing? Miranda said in a frightened voice. After all, you will regret it yourself later. Why should I? Hummed the guy. On the contrary, nymph, you and I are having so much fun now that the whole house will shake from our dancing. Don't please, fighting off the Major, the poor girl screamed. However, the rich bastard acted confidently and methodically, not listening to the tears and pleas for mercy. Tearing Miranda's shirt, he began to act like a predator for finally getting his desired prey. When it was over, Miranda wanted only one thing: to die right here and now. She had never experienced such shame, pain, and humiliation in her entire life. She was afraid to even raise her eyes to her tormentor. What if he wanted more? The girl frantically began to look around for some sharp object in case he tried to do it to her again. She'd rather bring a knife or screwdriver to her heart right away, just so she doesn't have to feel him on her skin again. Relax. I won't touch you again, Liam said in a lazy voice, adjusting the wide leather belt. You're nice and tasty, like popcorn. The bastard approached Miranda and squeezed her sharp chin with force. Do you know what the specialty of popcorn is? He asked the girl a question, but answered it himself. The specialty is that popcorn is tasty while you eat it, but once it's gone, it's gone. Get your filthy hands off me, he hissed at those resisting the pressure. Miranda, you're a scumbag, 200 people at a time. You? Here. Hearing the younger one only smirked. You're not thinking of telling my parents what happened. I mean, nymph, you're not the first of my maids I spend my free time with, are you? My father and mother are used to having money shaken out of me all the time. Naive fools, hicks, like you. You surprised me this time, though. Such an innocent, ordinary girl came here much more prepared and boring. And they didn't have to be begged. Mind you, you have no heart. Spit it in Miranda's face. I don't need it. Coldly, Liam parried. A gold credit card would suffice. Tightly stuffed his wallet. Yeah, any broad in your shoes would be kind of jumping. Pay attention to her. You're a snotty little snot. The girl, tangled in the scraps of her nightgown, continued to burn the major with a fierce look. Remember, you'll keep your mouth shut and keep your mouth shut. You can keep working here. No, my parents will hear my side of the story. And in it, you're a daring seductress from a remote village, ready to jump off the bed to a rich groom without a second thought. But you'll never make it. You'll be lying under the fence, but you won't find a job in the capital. You understand me? The mayor said the last words almost shouting. Miranda nodded silently. From the horror, she had almost lost the ability to think coherently. Well, that's good. Smiling contentedly, the rich bastard said, Now let's each go back to our room. We don't need to wake the people, right? The violence had changed Miranda irrevocably. Whereas before the girl was just polite with the other employees and tried to keep the same restraint with everyone, now she simply withdrew, preferring to spend rare moments of peace in her bedroom, previously locked up. At night she was tormented by vague disturbing dreams. In them she saw her late grandmother, her parents, who were always crying and even laughing, skewed from the terrible fire in the empty gray eye sockets. Liam's face. The last nightmare was the worst. The young maid really wouldn't tell anyone about what had happened to her, not her rapist's parents, not her own. She was afraid that her relatives would not accept her when they learned of the shame, and the whole village would talk about it. Oh, sweetie, there was no point in complaining about their scumbag son. Surely they were aware of what their future here sometimes did. Miranda was willing to bet anything that was not his first victim. However, everyone who was connected to the house of this cursed family, in one way or another, had to keep quiet. The price they were all forced to pay was too high. Otherwise, the days dragged on, gray and monotonous. At her core, Miranda still worked as a maid, sneaking around in the master's rooms and serving the pantry at lunches. Resentment gradually built up, like an open wound on her heart, and the pain for her due honor slowly began to recede. The girl had to put in a ton of effort each day to keep from breaking under the pressure of heavy feelings. The only thing that kept her conscious was the thought of her beloved family left behind in the village. Now the girl had the opportunity to regularly transfer them small amounts of money, which she was sure was an important help in their modest life. After a while, the girl realized, with horror, that she was pregnant. With great difficulty, she managed to ask Molly to leave and take a whole day off. Miranda immediately went to the hospital, where the doctor confirmed her worst fears. "Congratulations, Mommy. You're 8 weeks along," a smiling woman in a white coat announced to her. "I can see how happy Daddy is going to be." Then the doctor glanced at Miranda's ring finger, which was not wearing a wedding ring. "So you're not married, are you?" Slightly dismissive, she asked. "No," coldly replied Miranda. "Oh well," sighed the doctor. "Let's hope he proposes to you after all. When will he?" The young maid said nothing. Miranda decided to tell Liam that she was pregnant. Whatever it is, he's the father of her unborn child. To stalk the major outside the billiard room, Miranda herself grabbed the guy by the sleeve of his shirt and, overcoming her instinctive disgust, pulled him into the room for a serious conversation. "Wow, how hot are we?" the man joked immediately. "I thought you didn't even want to see me anymore. You're a smart girl." The boy tried to stroke Miranda's face, but she sharply threw his palm aside. "Don't be fooled," she gritted her teeth. "I have a thing for you. If it wasn't for that." The girl looked at her rapist with hatred. And what do you want to talk about?" The major mocked her. "Wait, let me guess. Did you need my money after all?" "Yes." Liam laughed unpleasantly, and that's when Miranda said, "I'm pregnant." "Clown." The laughter stopped abruptly. For a minute, the guy stood staring at her, as if he had been struck by lightning. He could hardly understand what his maid was saying, and when it came to him, the earth made one wide circle under his feet. "What do you mean, pregnant?" In an uncomprehending voice, he asked. Just like that, the insulted Miranda snapped at him. "Are you the father? I've never had another man." Stunned at the slides, slowly sat down in a large upholstered chair. Standing immediately, he was instantly overwhelmed by a wave of panic, because if his father finds out, so wait, you can get rid of him. I'll give you the money. Don't worry about it. Not you, not me. Don't want this baby. Miranda narrowed her beautiful eyes. "What makes you think I don't want it? You're the one who spreads human lives around like poker cards. It's not the kid's fault his father's a monster." Miranda tried her best to pretend that Liam's presence didn't bother her. In truth, though, her heart shrank with horror every time he moved smoothly in his chair, like a boa constrictor staring at a rabbit it had once eaten. Playing the cold-blooded bitch. The girl was trying to protect herself with kindness and affection. She'd already tried to stop the bastard, but she had failed then. Now she was trying to act by his methods in the hope that it would help secure the child some kind of future. Besides, if the village found out she'd gotten rid of the child, and the rumors would still spread, the grandfather would be labeled a murderer once and for all. The village where the girl grew up has always been known for its traditional, a bit even conservative views. That's what is wild to me a little. "Time to think," asked in the end the girl Liam. "We need to get this thing on the brain. And then I'm sure we'll work something out." Miranda, seeing that Liam did not answer her with a radical refusal, had softened a little. Even though she had a catty feeling in her heart, the maid still agreed to wait a couple of days. After all, she might not give the child to him. Clearly, for a major, he's an unfortunate accident. The only thing the girl wanted was to leave the mansion safely before her belly became too visible. She'd be fine from there. Eventually, she would return home to her parents. W. Jr. sat alone in his room, thinking, and so the girl got knocked up after all. It's a shame, but it happens. That's all right. But this Miranda flatly refused his proposal, and therefore became one big problem for him and his famous family. He didn't plan to marry her, of course. However, and to support a freak until his adulthood is still, by the way, it is still necessary to prove that the child is from him. He also did not much wanted. The general situation around the annuals also added oil to the fire. William was just about to run for office this spring, and a scandal with the pregnancy of a maid would obviously damage his political rating. It wasn't the right time. Oh, it wasn't the right time. Liam paced from corner to corner and pulled his hair. If his father found out that he had taken this provincial by force and made a child with her, he could not avoid a huge scandal. Oslo. The eldest has already threatened to bury his son in the army unless he does not finally take up his mind. And such a turn of events would only finally destroy the vestiges of a trust-money relationship between them. If his father lost his reputation in society, his son would automatically lose all the privileges and inheritance money that William had promised to leave him. And Liam was well aware that without his parents' money he was nothing. Then the rich bastard suddenly realized that Miranda's child would soon become known to everyone. And you can't hide a belly. And the bigger it gets, the more they'll start questioning the girl. What's from who? She'll give him up in a heartbeat. No, it would be necessary to act carefully, but radically. Liam decided that he would not let a random servant ruin his beautiful life, and for that he would have to do anything to preserve the reputation of himself and his family. Liam saw the only way out of the situation in removing Miranda from his life path forever. The junior decided that he had to act quickly, while Miranda's thoughts on how best to eliminate the girl were not at all noticeable. The major was lost in doubts. It would be possible to fake an accident so that she, for example, accidentally fell down the stairs, but that still didn't guarantee a 100% result. Could the girl have survived, or could she have miscarried? And then the truth would come out. If we talk about more brutal methods involving weapons, then here too, the guy had his own specifics. The thing is that Liam was afraid of blood since childhood, and if someone managed to kill an ordinary fly in front of him, the heir to the Bread Empire had to spend a couple days in a private room of an elite hospital to recover from the shock. In the end, the young rich man decided to go the other way, to calculate at what time Miranda usually dines. At the end of the day, the younger slipped into her glass of tea a huge dose of sleeping pills. Having waited until the unconscious girl collapsed on the floor, the villain without conscience loaded her into the trunk of his sports car and drove her outside the country complex. Late fall was famous in those places for its frosty evenings, and although it was not yet dark in the air, there was still a special chill in the night that was unique to November. Liam paused for a moment on the wide bridge over the river. The gravity of what he was doing was weighing on the major, but there was nothing he could do about it. Miranda had to be silenced forever and take with her to the grave the tangible evidence of the crime committed against her. If he didn't do it, he'd never be able to do it again. And that threatened his family with total ruin. Forgive me. Trust me. It will be better for everyone. Glislev Jr. turned to the girl and, pulling her body out of the trunk, quickly threw it over the railing of the bridge. The body fell into the cold black water with a loud splash. The current was quite strong in these parts. If it did not go to the bottom, it would be carried away under the ice. And then it's over, as they say. Having done his dark deed, Liam quickly got back into the car and drove away, leaving the night silence to witness another of his crimes. The guy was pretty sure that no one had seen him. However, contrary to the rich descendants' expectations, he was not the only living soul in the place. An elderly hermit fisherman was fishing at this time, drifting in a thicket of reeds on his old boat. Seeing how the young man cold-bloodedly threw the girl off the bridge, fisherman, without wasting a minute, threw the bait prepared for the night and began to row quickly with oars. He hoped to reach the place where the victim had fallen faster than the insidious current could reach her. He caught the unfortunate by the collar of her light uniform. Frohl miraculously managed to pull the girl out of the water, fumbling. We can barely hear the chain of pulse on her neck. The old man breathed out a sigh of relief that she was alive, but only what to do with this unusual find. The first thing Frol did was to pull off his warm tulip and wrap the nearly frozen girl in it. She didn't have any documents with her, or at least a business card to find out where she could work. One thing was clear: the girl urgently needed help, and Rayback knew a place where the victim could be taken without fear. For many years he had lived as a hermit by himself in a small hut at the very edge of the river. His main occupation was fishing, but sometimes, especially in summer, he managed to catch wild ducks in his exile. All these animals he gave to the old convent, which was not far from the place where Frol pulled Miranda. The elderly man would give fish and game there, and in return he would receive large portions, various snacks from the monastery kitchen. So they had been interacting with God's place for 30 years, and on quite mutually beneficial terms. It was already late evening when the fishermen finally reached the huge fortress of gray stone. The old man did not hesitate to strike the gates of the monastery several times with a massive cast iron ring. At first, no one opened it, but then a faint light came on in one of the windows, and in a few minutes he was already handing over countless drowned people to the care of the local abbess, Mother Christina, and a dozen young nuns who hurried to the aid of their mentor at such a late hour. "You just be careful with her," he told the nuns. The girl dived into the icy water. After all, the boy froze to death. "Don't worry, Christina. If our Lord wills it, your mermaid will recover." Mother Christina smiled demurely. Miranda was given all the help she needed and left to recoup next to the heat on the fuel stove from hypothermia. The girl went into nervous shock. This, also a killer dose of sleeping pills, contributed to the immediate miscarriage. When one of the nuns saw the red spots on the girl's covering, she immediately realized everything, and with the permission of the abbess, called an ambulance. The doctors were amazed to learn the circumstances of Miranda's appearance in the convent. However, they did not go into details. Their job was to save the patient. The rest was not so important, especially since Mother Christina promised to take the girl as soon as she was able to walk. At the same time, the doctors were still obliged to inform the relatives of what had happened, so they waited for the patient to come to her senses. Christina, however, felt that she had to be with the saved one, no matter what, when she found herself in the possession of the convent entrusted to her Lord. The abbess realized it was the sign she had been waiting for years. The fact is that in recent years, the woman began to doubt the correctness of her chosen path and the girl found in the river, as if she had returned to the path of faith. When Miranda came to her senses, it turned out to everyone's surprise that she remembered absolutely nothing about herself or how she found herself in the cold river in late fall. The poor girl thought she might have wanted to kill herself because of the unplanned baby. She had been told about it by the medics, and so she gladly agreed to live for a while in the convent with the abbess and the other sisters. Thus, Miranda hoped to cleanse her soul a little, almost committed a terrible sin. By the grace of fate, the former maid began to live in the convent on an equal footing with ordinary nuns. Every morning the girl prayed for the morning court, participated in the preparation of food, and again prayed for the salvation of her soul and soul, her own never-born baby. It seemed to the girl all the time that some important detail of the reality encompassing, for which she could finally remember everything, was eluding her. But until that detail was found, Miranda continued to spend her days in righteous labor and prayer. She never decided to take a real tonsure. The girl went about in a cassock. Her hair was always covered with a shawl. No makeup on her face. But at the same time, Miranda quietly performed all the standard duties of a nun. Therefore, the local sisters considered the girl something like a spoon, which can leave their monastery at any time when she is ready for it and wants to return to the worldly life. Thus passed a year. One day Miranda was asked to pick up a box of donations from a charity center. The money was to be used for the restoration of the abandoned part of the convent, where there were rooms for women who had fallen into difficult situations with their children. At one time, this wing had suffered a sudden collapse and dilapidated its structures, so its renovation has also long been Mother Christina's deepest, most mundane dream. Picking up a heavy wooden box, Miranda, who by then had become known as the church's fake Just and Sister Lisa, happened to notice a secular glossy magazine lying right on the reception desk. The photo on the cover seemed vaguely familiar to the nun. Flipping through the glossy to the right page, the girl began to scrutinize the staged photos showing a romantically inclined couple, the bride and groom that were to be married, and on this occasion invited everyone to their huge country house, outwardly resembling a fairy tale castle. The event promised guests the performance of the brightest stars of the national variety and a real royal feast, so those wishing to join the festivities were free to come to the mansion on the appointed day and time, which will be announced a little later. "Rick, you machine," whispered the nun, looking at the handsome and at the same time indifferent face of the young groom. The bride next to him looked exactly like one of those beauty blogs that her best friend Cindy had loved to read in the past. Liam, Rick, Cindy, Clara. The pain cut Miranda's brain in two with a sharp blade, forcing the world around her into complete darkness for a split second. The girl's memory unloaded from its bowels all the memories associated with life as a nun in the convent. Miranda remembered from her adoring parents and everything that had happened to her in the cursed mansion, spouses, businessmen, and her best friends who had probably buried her long ago. The girl tore the magazine in half with such force that the thin pages seemed to bend pitifully under the pressure of her delicate-looking but strong fingers. Fortunately, there was no one around at that moment. Otherwise, the young sister in the cassock would certainly have a lot of uncomfortable questions to ask. A richly decorated courtyard. The courtyard of the manor was literally buzzing with fashionable dance music. The guests who had come to the feast congratulated the young bride and groom. Just arrived from the registry office, there were waiters and local servants everywhere, providing all the guests with a continuous flow of alcohol and exquisite snacks. Liam wanted to show that the generosity of his house extended to all walks of life, and therefore ordered to let everyone to the celebration. His bride was the daughter of a very important official, with whom the elder entered a close friendship and made a profitable business. For many years, the girl was, of course, a perfect beauty. However, in the feelings of the groom did not particularly need. Both realized that this marriage was a good deal for both parties. Therefore, it was enough for them to sympathize with each other. Miranda entered the party almost unnoticed. A long hooded walkie-talkie completely hid her face. Therefore, the former maid could not worry about being recognized. At that moment, when the gathered celebrity guests began to read from the stage toasts to the health of the young ones, Miranda got as close to them as possible, and having got the moment, deftly jumped on the high wooden platform. An ominous silence immediately reigned around. Miranda took in her hands a beautiful, expensive microphone with the initials of the owners of the house, and bringing it to her lips, abruptly threw back her black hood. Liam's face lost any sign of color in an instant. All the blood in his veins seemed to have suddenly dried up, leaving behind only prickly dust. Puzzled bride did not understand what a nun in a cassock was doing here, and even with a huge cross hanging from a gilded chain, the exact fatal banner of justice. Miranda, on the other hand, stared absent-mindedly at the major who had tried to kill her along with her unborn child only a year ago, and slowly spoke into the microphone. "I have only one thing to say to the bride right now. Please remember that there is a child rapist and murderer sitting right next to you. You could be next at any moment." At the same moment, Miranda was taken under the arms by the guards and led the completely unresisting girl to the other end of the park. At parting, the nun rewarded the groom with a frank, contemptuous look, after which he felt his whole life collapsing like a sand castle under the force of sea waves. The festivities, of course, ended there, after numerous and very humiliating for the family garden. Proceedings to the career of the Bread King came to a turnless end to run for deputy. William never made it. Tried the father of the failed bride, who served under the Federation Council, and the compromise of his native son. The family's business also suffered huge losses, after which it was finally liquidated by state structures. The bride's parents were in very high political circles. Therefore, the desire to wipe off the face of the earth so set up that their company and some small on their scale businessmen became for these people almost the main goal of the year. In the end, they achieved it. Liam, forever covered by the cloak of disgrace in his own family, became persona non grata in secular society. The father was barely able to negotiate with the police so that his son would not be sent to a colony for a long period of time. Instead, William personally placed Liam in a closed specialized clinic, where his dear son was to undergo a long course of psychotherapy and treatment for various addictions. After learning what Miranda experienced and how she almost died at the hands of his potential son-in-law, the father of the bride, the same politician obliged the family to pay the girl a huge financial compensation. In case of refusal, the press will immediately be granted an interview in which all previous victims of violence suffered at the hands of their vicious son will be mentioned in black and white. Liam's mother, burns with burning shame, immediately wrote a check to Miranda Twiggs in her name, which she could cash at any bank with no problem. The woman wanted to do everything possible to at least make amends to the girl for their heinous guilt. Miranda herself, having come a long way from a knave girl from the province to a maid, and a nun who lost her memory, but fresh in her heart full faith in God, left the convent to continue her own journey. Mother Christina did not hold her down or persuade her to stay, although the woman's heart had been attached to this unusual girl for a long time. The abbess had too much respect for other people's lives to allow herself to interfere in God's providence and condemn people to exist together, and was not originally intended for them. On the money of annuals, Miranda's first order of business was to rebuild that very damaged wing in the convent. Now all women who had suffered in one way or another from the criminal actions of men could go there again. With the remaining money, the girl opened a small beauty salon with only 3 chairs, where she immediately called her best friend Cindy to work. And Cindy, it turns out, for a long time tried to find Miranda after her sudden disappearance from the house too, but then lost all hope. They were madly pleased to learn that their favorite rags for profit and gladly agreed to become not only employees of the salon, but also business partners. The former maids of the nun, whom they now promised to accompany everywhere and never let alone. Which, of course, was a good friendly joke. The girl's business, though still small, has already begun to bring in a steady income. All 3 of them joke that soon they will become real business ladies, as their parents dreamed of. Now in Miranda's life, everything is good. She met a great guy, Oleg. He works as a volunteer in the city shelter for the poor, and the girl tries to be there as often as possible to help the needy together with him. With Oleg, she is absolutely happy and was finally able to forget those terrible days in the house of rich bread makers. Young people have recently begun to live together, and the girl even managed to move her beloved parents to her from the village. She bought them a separate apartment and is actively engaged in its arrangement. Oleg does not mind. After all, he grew up in an orphanage and in the person of his father and mother. Miranda was able to finally find such a long-awaited family.